And joining me now is Dr. Daria Long. She's an emergency room physician at Erlanger Hospital in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Dr. Daria, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today. So the president continues saying that the outbreak is under control, but cases are rising in 15 states and Puerto Rico, and we've had more than 1,000 deaths a day in the U.S. for the 10th time in 2 weeks. Does this crisis sound to you, in his words, under control?
Good morning, Andrea. No, we can't call this under control. It's good that as a nation, our number of cases are falling overall on the 7-day average. But as you mentioned, there are pockets in the United States where cases are rising, which means that while the trend may be improving as a nation, we have to pay a lot of attention to those pockets. We have to be extremely vigilant because we are not out of the woods now.
So you've been working closely with school districts in Georgia on their reopening plans, but a second grader tested positive after just 1 day back in school, and several staff and teachers have been either sick with the virus or been in contact with someone who was. So are schools there prepared to reopen safely for in-person classroom learning?
So, Andrea, that really depends on the school. You're right. Given the current prevalence where I live in Fulton County, every school that's going to be open will potentially have new cases of coronavirus walking through their door, which is why I'm telling all of the schools that you have to look at 3 key things. One is, how are you going to keep those cases of coronavirus from coming in the door? How are you going to screen people? How are you going to test people and do symptom screening? How are you going to get families to to say that they are going to decrease their mobility so that they're going to be less likely to spread the virus? How are you going to decrease transmission within the school? And then how are you going to really rapidly identify and very conservatively quarantine anyone who is a positive case? As we've seen, you can't a la carte this. You can't do it halfway. We've seen that in camps. We've seen that what happened in Israel when they have an outbreak. When you do one thing, but you don't do the other two, you let people go without masks or without distancing, this all falls apart. We have to be very, very vigilant and do all 3 of those things that I call our school keystones.
Mississippi just made masks mandatory at schools after a sharp rise in deaths and hospitalization. What does this order tell you, and is it really enough? Because you were talking about that it requires several elements at the end of the day.
Yeah. So for one, every school that wants to stay open and actually wants to stay open needs to be having mandatory masks for all students and all teachers. That is a basic. I know one thing I want all parents to do is to make sure that they're getting their kids ready to be wearing masks, just to touch on that. Because if parents wait and think that the teachers are going to be able to teach the class and also teach their kids to wear masks, everybody's going to be distracted and the risk of more spread will rise. So those are really important. But again, wearing masks are one key component.
Aside from that, how should schools get prepared to reopen safely for in-person classes?
Yeah, so schools need to look at all their protocols, and they need to know all the scenarios. We don't need to be figuring out what to do at 11 a.m. on Tuesday when you've had that child come into who's been positive. Schools need to know and need to share to parents what happens if somebody in your child's class turns positive. What happens if a sibling of a child in your class turns positive? And what happens if you have a positive case in your own family? We need to have this all spelled out so that there's no surprises coming down the road.
And I know that many parents have no choice other than to send their children to in-person classrooms if obviously their school offers this. What can those families do to protect themselves and their children?
Yeah, and that's true. And I have a 3-year-old and I have a 6-year-old, and I'm going to be sending my children to school as well. So as I mentioned before, getting your children to understand how to wear masks is one of the most important things. So I created a guide for parents to be able to do this. It takes about anywhere from 3 to 10 days, depending on the age of your child and how likely they are to like a mask. But letting them learn how to do that appropriately, and they can wear a mask, they can wear a mask plus a face shield, so that at least you know that you've taken the very first step. That's the most important thing parents can be doing. And number 2, one of the key things we know for spread within a school is how mobile the parents and the community were. If they are more than 70% mobile, 80% or more mobile, going back to life as usual, we'll have outbreaks in schools. If our communities can start policing themselves and decreasing their mobility and decreasing our prevalence, that's the best chance that our schools have.
Some excellent advice there. Thanks so much, Dr. Daria Long, emergency room physician. Please take care.